Absolutely delighted to welcome Dom, and thank you so much for being with us. So what we thought we would do as a structure, Dom, is for you to just give a spiel about yourself and some of your top line kind of thinking, and then we'll get into a bit of a conversation with some of the pre-submitted questions, and then we'll kind of take it from there. So ladies and gentlemen, the most fabulous Dr. Dom Thompson, over to you.
Thank you, Vivi. That's quite an entrance, isn't it? I feel like I should have sparkly things now, around me. But no, basically, I'm just a GP who's very, very interested in young people and students in particular, mental health and well-being. And I've been doing this, I was an NHS doctor for 23 years. And then 3.5 years ago, I decided that I would stop doing clinical face-to-face medicine so that I could tackle things on the mental health front in a different way. And so that's what I've been doing for the last 3.5 years. I've been writing books, giving talks, done a couple of TEDx's. I sit on a serious number of committees because there's so many people now thinking about this. But it's fair to say that 20 years ago, when I sort of started out as a very baby GP in student health, no one was talking about mental health. It was one of those things that would maybe come across your desk, as it were, once or twice a day. But in my particular case, by the time I left in 2017, it was 9 out of 10 of my consultations. So that's what I'm driven by, really, is to try and address what is going on. If you are interested in a bit more about the why, why is all this different now? That's what TEDx #1 was about. That is called What I Learned from 78,000 Consultations with University Students. The problem is they then asked me to do another TEDx, or a different organization did, and it's a huge honor, but you always feel like it's the difficult second album. You've given it everything in the first one, and so that one is a more niche one about supporting people who self-harm. So those are the sorts of things I do. I'm just really interested in how we can support young people at a sort of pivotal time in their life. And my interests have now widened. Some of you will be aware I now do more stuff around supporting parents to support their teens and tweens and getting them off to the real world, uni, or into a job, as well as students and universities. So I've sort of broadened my interest because I realized that the people who are there at the beginning of the path, the families, the carers, the parents, they also need to sort of hear a bit more about what's going on, and that led to the book How to Grow a Grown Up, which I wrote with a colleague, Fabienne Vales. So that's kind of a quick summary. But yeah, I'm happy to talk about mental health, financial mental health, and all other types of student mental health, really.
You see, it's not possible to too big you up, Dom, because there is so much in there. So let's go straight into some of the questions that we've got, and let's get into a bit of a convo. And again, if anyone's got anything they want to chuck in, or comments or questions, obviously throw them in. But I thought we could start with just addressing the elephant in the room. We are in this insane kind of COVID time. We've all run out of adjectives to describe just what a weird time this is. We know that well-being has taken a real hit. Of students, do you feel that this is a real issue, or do you feel that it kind of has always been like this and has just been exacerbated a little bit? Like, what is new about this current situation? And as a kind of follow-up, so that we're not constantly I'm not constantly peppering you, what can institutions do, given that so many decisions are made kind of at the senior levels, but actually our guys are actually the doers and the ones who are facing students and are actually at the forefront of it? What can be done there if they have people who are coming to them under these conditions?
Okay, so the first thing to say, and some of you may have heard me say it before, but the kids were not all right before COVID. So they were already struggling. We were having these conversations. There'd been a massive increase in the number of documents and university protocols and mental health strategies. So everybody was more aware that this newer, younger generation coming through, Gen Z, if you will, aged 11 to 25, they were struggling more. And then we had COVID. And so we've added an extra layer of pressure on them at a time when, perhaps more importantly than anything else, their brains are still developing. If we're talking about young students, I know that students can be of any age, but I'm focusing mainly up to the age of 25. you know, their biology is still developing. They're still developing their brain, so their life skills, their social skills, you know, all sorts of other things like developing independence, they will all happen at about that age. And then what we've done is sort of add in what I can only describe as a massive, great trauma, essentially, at a time when they want to be connecting with others. They are young people, teenagers and young adults are laser driven to connect with other humans. That is one of their overwhelming biological drives, which is why, you know, we see them wanting to meet up and go to university, even if it isn't going to be great. So whilst, of course, those of us with a bit more life experience might say, you know, we could predict that, you know, that there were going to be problems when they went off to uni, or we could, you know, have perhaps dealt with it slightly differently in terms of supporting them when they got to uni. The young people themselves, those first years, those undergrads, they are driven to go and meet new people and to be with other new people. And they'd rather, frankly, in many cases, do that than sit at home with their family who they'd already been with for the last few months. So that's just focusing on the kind of the big impacts, which are isolation, loneliness, and social separation. And then the other massive thing that's been going on for all of us, but really impacts them as well, is uncertainty. When we don't know as humans what's going to happen next, we are uncomfortable. It drives anxiety. Okay, very few of us, I mean, a few very, you know, brave and adventurous souls thrive on the anxiety and not knowing what's going to happen next. But most of us are somewhere else on that scale. And for young people, the constant uncertainty, the constant not knowing what's happening next, that anxiety has either been a new thing that they've had to deal with. So there are young people dealing with a new mental health problem or well-being issue. And then all of those that already had an issue or were teetering on the brink now have an issue. So we are seeing, so I know my other half is a GP, and he's seeing young people, and he's not a specialist GP for young people. He's seeing children from the age of 7 attending with anxiety or contacting the GP with anxiety in a way they've never had before. So there is no doubt at all that COVID has had an impact on people's well-being. So that was quite a long answer. And then you asked me a bit about what they can do, or universities can do. Well, I mean, obviously there are no one straight simple answer, or we'd all be doing it, but I do think there are some things that universities as organizations can and are doing. And this is not to say they haven't been. God, they've been working flat out for nearly a year now, supporting their students. And I have nothing but huge respect for the student support teams, academics and staff. But this is just my broad thoughts about, you know, what should and hopefully is already happening. Dealing with the uncertainty is one. So I think being really upfront and saying, you know, we don't know this bit that we're planning. So, you know, maybe exactly how exams will run or whatever. I'm just using an example. But when we do, or as soon as we do, we will tell you. So being really transparent about what you do and don't know and what you can and can't tell them, rather than letting people sort of think, well, do they know but they're not telling me, or shall I keep asking them? You know, so it's about being really transparent but honest about what you can and can't tell people, so you keep people involved. Another thing that I've said before, and I think has been helpful to a few people, was to ask the students, how can we make this less stressful? What can we do to make this less anxiety inducing? What is it they're worried about? And I had a lovely message from a professor of biology at York, I think, who had emailed then, after hearing that, he emailed all his students in his faculty and said, oh, how can we as a department and faculty help you to feel less stressed? And he said within about 24, 48 hours, he had like hundreds of replies, but there were themes, and it really helped them to structure their support, because just asking that question makes you focus on what's going on. So that's the anxiety side of things. And then I think another thing that perhaps we can get into a bit more, but is the longer term support, the sort of, how do we recession proof these young people, these and older people, the people who are going to graduate into, unfortunately, a recession, and are living through this recession. I think maybe we can talk a bit more about that, but I do think there are specific things that have been shown to help people who are graduating or at university in a recession that we've learned from the 80s and 90s, so we can learn from that, and that universities can be doing specific things around that. And maybe we can talk a bit more about that in a minute.
And I think that's fascinating. The first is, I didn't know that there was a biological drive to connect with people when you're younger. And of course, once you say it, it makes total sense, which is why the hyper focus on what kind of learning do you have then is perhaps not addressing all of the challenges, which actually, how do you socialize and use the kind of third space that is university. So given that everything is kind of remote at the moment, and the idea of communicating with your students, I think is great, and would encourage, we've been doing that a lot, just asking questions, because actually students want to share. They want to give their ideas. And as you said, thematically, they tend to break down into only a few categories, with communication being right at the top. So I think that's fantastic advice. Given that everything is remote, do you feel that there's, and completely echo what you say about universities are just doing an unbelievable superhuman job, so should go without saying, in terms of remote support, and universities did a giant leap kind of 10 years into the future in terms of how that's delivered. Do you feel that can tick some of the boxes that have historically been ticked face to face, or is it just a necessity and we'll go back immediately once these restrictions are lifted?
No, I mean, there are definitely some people, some humans, some students who always prefer a slightly more distant connection. And I think for them, that has allowed them to perhaps connect in a way they didn't before. But we know from asking students in the past, do you prefer face-to-face talking, counselling, GP contact, and so on, that, students, just like all other humans, actually, even if they're from a techie generation, they prefer face-to-face contact. So I think what we'll do is we'll have really improved our skills and our tech and our ability and our planning for online stuff, but we'll have an approach where we go back to maybe face-to-face is first line. And then, for those who prefer, they now have a much easier option to say, actually, whether it's your GP or the counselling service or a money advisor, to say, could I have an online appointment? I prefer that because they, want to be in the comfort of their own room, or that, they feel less embarrassed, or they don't want to have their screen on, whatever. I mean, of course, there will be some people for whom that is a great step forward. And I think that's great, because, before I left my practice, I'd started talking about, could we perhaps start doing some online consultations, video consultations, which is not that radical, but it wasn't really happening. And everyone was like, no, we're not doing that. That would involve technology and change, and we're just not keen. And actually, obviously, in the last year, that's all that's happened in lots of practices, apart from where they have to, get people to come down for sort of examination. And so, actually in the future, that will now be a mix, I've no doubt.
Yeah, I would agree with that. As long as we remember that people are always the best app, but sometimes to add capacity on campuses, the use of technology can smooth some of that. And you've mentioned GP practices, and it seems like a good time to kind of jump into one of the questions. Sophie is asking, how do we best encourage students to make their first visit to the GP? What should they expect? And what do they do if the experience isn't what they'd hoped for? And Jane has said that they've created a guidance document about how to talk to your GP, which has been quite popular, but maybe you could give some of your insight about how the universities might encourage this.
So absolutely. So when I'm talking to students or sixth formers and so on, and parents, I always say one of the first things you've got to do when you get to uni is register with a GP. And I think people don't really always realize they're going to need them at some point, and then when they do need them, it can be a bit faffy to try and get in front of one, whether it's virtually or in person, when you actually need them. So registering with the GP is really important. If you can find one that is specialized in student health, that is great, because obviously the people who work there have chosen to work there. They generally like working with students. There's always the odd grumpy one, but but that's everywhere. So on the whole, I would say find a practice that specializes in student health where possible. Ask for recommendations. Different GPs have different interests. So you'll have one who's more interested in dermatology, another one who does sports injuries. So obviously you can see whichever GP you choose, unless it's an emergency, in which case obviously you'll see the on-call GP. I do think it's really important to build that relationship. So it's fine to sort of you might go along to just one random GP and find, oh, they're not quite who I click with. That's okay. Find someone else in that practice. It's it's such a personal connection. You know, you know, we all know that, but we have to sort of, you know, when young people are starting out and perhaps they haven't been to a GP necessarily on their own before, or they've always gone to the family one and they've just never given it a second thought, you know, actually it's a little bit trial and error. It's like finding your favorite brand of coffee. It isn't necessarily the first latte you have, you're going to go for a different, you know, GP the next time. So I do think it's trial and error. I think it's fine to try different ones. I think you can then build your longer term relationship. They are there, generally speaking, you know, year round. Obviously, I do understand that a few practices have branch surgeries and stuff that close, but the team, the GPs don't disappear. They'll be somewhere, and they'll have people to support them. You know, for example, if they're off on holiday, obviously there'll be locums and so on. So I just think it's so important to really I don't know, just encourage students to use that resource, because it's free, it's expert, and they have a huge range of experience, but often very specialized and interested in young people's health.
Yeah, and I think that's fascinating and spot on. We have got so many mysteries when we're young. And so when you're, you know, when you're 18, 19, everything you're facing is brand new under so many, you know, so many of the things that you come across are brand new. And so going to the doctor is like this mystery, and it's mystifying and it's scary because it's your body and who knows. And in a way, it's, and just to segue to kind of the money conversation, it's a very similar thing to money. There's all of these brand new things that you're tackling. It's very scary. You think you're the only one. And with healthcare, there's nothing that's happened to you that hasn't happened to at least, you know, a million other people. And it is about starting to demystify some of those conversations and giving people the language to have it with the GP. So I think that's great advice. In terms of well-being, you and I have spoken about kind of money as a part of the well-being kind of triangle with physical, mental, and financial kind of health. Where do you see this conversation kind of going? It seems to have kind of burst a little bit out of nowhere and now gaining some, you know, gaining strength because of COVID. What are your kind of thoughts on how money fits into everything?
Oh, money is absolutely a vital part. I mean, it's a part of everybody's lives, and it can feel a bit like it's sort of spun as part of the kind of additional conversation, but it is integral to so many people's stress and anxiety. And one of the things that you know, we recognize when we deal with, you know, people's health and well-being is that, you know, money issues create mental health issues, but also mental health issues mean you're more likely to then get money problems, maybe because you're not managing them, or you're ignoring debt, or you're, you know, because of the mental health problem, if it's an addiction, you're spending money. So, you know, it's this vicious cycle that is so important to sort of so many people's lives. And obviously as students, for very many, I know not all, but for many of them, it's just always this kind of black cloud hanging over them, that yes, we all have debt to a greater or lesser degree, but it's about how much debt they're getting into that's unnecessary and stressful, and they, you know, don't feel in control of. So it's a little bit different to having a mortgage, but it, you know, they can build debts, or they can't see it, you know, the longer term way out. So I don't doubt at all that learning to deal with money is a life skill, like learning to deal with people and social relationships, like learning to learn. You know, we have these life skills that we learn at university or in the workplace when we leave home. And I don't think we actually talk about money and financial skills enough as part of that. So that's my kind of overview of it. But obviously we can sort of talk in more detail about it.
Yeah, and I think it comes back as well to what you were saying right at the beginning, that how do we prepare parents to prepare young people for life beyond the home? And money really does sort of fit into that. One of the questions that we got in advance of the session is how can we prioritize content and best practice in engaging students with financial issues? Don't know if you have any thoughts about how to prioritize content and best practice.
Vivi, sorry, can I just add to that, because we'd had another question prior to this, which
go ahead.
was the same, which was also about not only how do you prioritize, but actually how do support staff who are supporting students maybe engage with the GP team as well, to maybe have a coordinated effort, so maybe they kind of link in. But yeah, I just thought it was worth mentioning at this point as well.
Thank you. Well, so one of the things that I would strongly recommend, perhaps this is for teams working in universities, but also schools actually, is for the well-being teams, who often are, quite well circumscribed, and, one big team, often, counselling, disability, GPs, whatever, one big team, but to work much more closely with the financial advice people, who often are very much a different, they're a different department, and actually working together to educate and upskill the students, all of them, I mean, this is of any age really, around money and the sort of money skills, financial skills. For me, that is something that would not be too complicated to do, a closer working relationship, and developing, whether it's seminars or ongoing workshops or interactive things. And certainly, I mean, there are studies from the States that show that money is a source of great anxiety, of course, and that one of the things that has been helpful in the colleges system is to work more closely between financial advisors and well-being advisors. So that is something that, and I will freely say, when I left Bristol, certainly we hadn't explored that side of things, even though money came up in a lot of consultations. It just sort of I think because it's almost so ubiquitous and such a kind of like, oh yeah, money, we just didn't think about, well, what should we do about that then? We had workshops about all sorts of things, homesickness and loneliness and how to, deal with a long-term condition. But we personally, the medics and the well-being side of things, we didn't get involved. And yet this is despite the fact that my own personal, examples of right in front of me, students struggling with money was, patient students saying, I can't get that prescription, even though it was really, I don't have any money. I can't go because they didn't qualify for free prescriptions in England. Or they might say they'd lost a lot of money because, for example, they have bipolar disorder and they've been on a, hypomania or manic streak, and they had spent a lot of money, or they had an addiction. So I was dealing with money issues, but I wasn't thinking, so how do we educate the students about money? I was very much more, obviously, perhaps, but focused, okay, well, let's manage bipolar or the anxiety that's coming from the fact they don't have their money. And I would also sometimes hand them 20 quid so they could get their prescription, and then they'd pay me back when they had it if they could. But, I just saw this all the time, but I freely admit I didn't address it.
And I do think that it's a newish issue. It's interesting that you use the word control, which is very much, as you said, we all have debt. I mean, Richard Branson, we often joke, has more debt than the rest of us put together, but he probably sleeps fine. Unlike a student who might have £100 of buy now, pay later debt, which is keeping them up at night and really stressing them and panicking them out. So I think the word control is a very interesting one. I just want to ask if anyone's got any questions that they kind of wanted to throw out. Please do. We want to get everything out of Dom's brain that we can. So if you've got any questions, please do let us know. Dom, while we're waiting to see if anyone's got any other questions, in terms of, and obviously not naming any names, but are there best practices in terms of bringing together all elements of the student? So, I mean, obviously we've discussed, the physical health is important, the mental health is important, the financial health is important. Are there best practices out there that you can kind of point to without necessarily naming any names, or any things that you think actually people should be doing and universities or parents should be doing or could be doing to bring all of those conversations together?
I mean, I'm not going to be able to say to you, such and such a university I'm aware of doing loads on it, because I'm going to, as I said, I probably haven't paid as much attention to the financial side of it as I could have done. I guess I'm just making my own excuses here, but because I have been so focused on the mental health, purer mental health side of it, I suppose. And but I do think that, yes, there are things that they can do. And so this takes me back to that recession proofing thing. We've got young people and old people, all sorts of people graduating over the next few years into a society that will undoubtedly be going through some sort of, recession or constriction, and perhaps reduced travel opportunities and things like that. So we have to do what we can to support those people, not just give them the education and the degree, but there are 3 things that have been shown, as I said, in studies to really help people thrive better in this difficult sort of climate of recession, and that is building their social networks. So making sure that they have as much, you know, connections with their universities, with social groups, with sports societies, whatever they can, encourage them, build their social network, like whether it's you visualize it as a scaffolding or a spider's web, that's really protective in difficult times. The next thing is to give them really good careers advice that doesn't just stop the minute they leave the institution. So I know lots of institutions do that now. They allow their graduates to kind of come back to them for up to, I don't know, a year afterwards or something, but really good careers advice is invaluable in difficult times. And the final thing of the 3 is money skills, and I think this is so important. So whether it's not just giving them the skills, the financial know-how, the understanding, which I think is, you know, to hardship funds or advice where they can get, you know, benefits or safe loans. I'm not talking about just random, you know, some bloke round the back of the bike sheds, but you know, I do think it's really important that those 3 things, so that universities, which I think they do now, see themselves as these holistic institutions where they provide an amazing education, lots of social skills, but also these other things as well that will set people on as good a path as you can really in life in difficult times. So those are perhaps the 3 things that universities can focus on next to academic.
I think that's excellent advice. And I think whether we like it or not, a lot of students want to get a good job when they graduate, or want to get a job when they graduate. And it is going to be it's not the first recession people are graduating into. I graduated into a recession, but it is certainly going to be one of the deepest and longest, and already had some structural issues. So I think that's fantastic advice. We've got a few questions who've come through. So Michelle is saying great stuff, Dom, which we agree with. How do you think the extra debt incurred as a result of COVID-19 will manifest itself, and what should we be looking out for?
Okay, so we know, and we're seeing this increasingly from studies that are being done, that's so focusing on students now, probably twice as many students are worried about money in some form as they were 4 years ago. So we know that from 2 different NUS studies. We know that they are losing their part-time jobs. They may have been furloughed. If they had a little side hustle going, it's possibly gone. They might have had to have time off sick, you know, in their part-time jobs, not just lost the jobs. So for lots of reasons, students are going to be struggling financially. And on the flip side of that, they may have been spending more, as many people have, on things like alcohol to get through it. Not recommended, but inevitable, you know, in the current circumstances. So for lots of reasons, students are going to be struggling more financially. The problem is that can drive not only specific mental health issues, which I'm about to come back to, but it can also drive them into more risky ways of making money. And that's something that I really do worry about, whether that might be sex work, it might be taking part in medical trials. You know, there are a whole variety of ways. You know, doing night shifts endlessly is terrible for your health, unfortunately. So there are lots of ways that they're putting themselves at risk, or more likely to, if they're in more debt. And we now know that, you know, students are using food banks and so on. So we know the problems are already taking hold. The way that it affects them from a mental health point of view, well, I mean, you know, this isn't rocket science. I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but money stresses lead to poor sleep, anxiety, anger, shame, guilt, embarrassment. All of these things impact our well-being, impact our self-esteem and our confidence, and can make it more difficult for us to then, you know, go, right, I'm going to sort this out, because actually you feel so crushed under the weight of all of those different emotions. And of course, then those emotions impact your relationships, or your ability to get your piece of work done, or another job, you know. So and not to forget physical health. Physical health is then impacted by the lack of sleep or the night shifts and so on. So I think, when we talk about students and increasing money worries, it is this huge sort of ripple effect that I really worry about in terms of the impact on their well-being.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I agree with every word of that. So Sally's got a question, then we'll come back up to Pete. Sally's question is, any advice on how to financially educate students who've got existing mental health problems, and how can we best tailor the money skills to them, if you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, I think, I would have taken an approach for educating students. They very much engage with messages from their peers, and we've talked about why. So if you're going to do a campaign or a workshop, it really helps, I think, if you frame it as coming from other students who've, a couple of years older, but they've experience or whatever, rather than as us telling you what you need to know. And I know that we don't do it like that, but I'm just saying, we know that peer-led campaigns have a bigger impact. And then if it is specifically like, students with a defined, mental health problem, say they have either bipolar or depression, and it's, they've got into this spiral of debt, I think, naming it and making it really clear that it's a non-judgmental, we recognize that this can be a side effect of your mental health condition, this is not your fault, let's address that. And and then having the sort of peer-led messaging, I think, would probably, for me, be the best way to approach it. But I'm sure you guys, you're experts at this sort of thing, you've got lots of ideas about how to get students to engage with campaigns.
Yeah, and I'll just throw in there that King's College comes to mind. They have a fantastic Money Mentors program where they train up students to be mentors to other students, obviously being very careful about the advice guidance kind of line to not overstep and put anyone in kind of regulatory breaches. But King's College have a fantastic program that's been running for years, and I'm sure that they're very happy to chat with anybody who wants to find out more about that. So Pete has a question, and then if there's any last questions, please do pop them in. Pete's question is, alongside Student Minds, Student Space, which obviously is a fantastic resource that's come up because of COVID, but probably hopefully will stay live for a while. Are there any nationally available resources to help COVID bound students that you can signpost people to?
Good question, Pete. I mean, obviously I am biased towards the Student Minds and Student Space one, only because I've written quite a lot of their content and I'm a clinical advisor for Student Minds. But I think, it depends then on what the sorts of issues are. I think if there are money worries and money and mental health, Vivi will know this, and obviously Blackbullion can help and has brilliant resources. I am just saying that I do know you've got some brilliant worksheets and stuff on there, but also there's mentalhealthandmoneyadvice.org, which is a national organization, which is, again, very approachable, very easy to access. I think never forget the NHS website does have a lot of really good quality advice, quality information. I believe that I helped to develop a COVID app, which again, I think is free to you. I would have to find the details. If you want me to send it to you afterwards, you can then send it on. But there certainly, we did a lot of work on developing that and making sure it was very accessible and useful to lots of people, specifically, of course, around COVID advice. So I think, places like mind.org are just brilliant. And actually Young Minds, I know Young Minds is specifically, aimed at teenagers, but actually they've just got really nice, very, very good COVID resources and very chatty and engaging sort of style. So those are probably the big ones I would go for. I'm sure if you've got other ideas, stick them in the chat. But those are kind of my go-tos.
Fantastic. And we obviously send out a summary of the session in a newsletter later. So we will get from Dom the various links so that she's not madly trying to find them while chatting. And we'll pop them into the newsletter so that we've got a bit of a resource area there. And Nicola has said, if anyone's interested in KCL's mentors program, they're going to be doing some training with NASMA in March. So reach out to NASMA to sign up for that. And again, we'll signpost that in the newsletter. If you're not signed up to the newsletter, please do sign up to the newsletter, and we'll be able to signpost you to everything. If there are any final questions, please do pop them in. We are right on schedule timing wise, which is very unusual for us. We're trying to be more disciplined with our timing this year. So I just want to thank Dom immensely. It was super duper helpful. I know that my team are like madly writing up notes to follow up. Dom has written countless books. We are going to be getting a bunch of them and doing some student giveaways on our Instagram around those. So do go into her, well, not into her Amazon account, obviously, because we don't like Amazon anymore. Go into her personal account and buy some books there. And if you've got any questions, obviously, I'm sure she'd be delighted to hear from you. And Dom does some fantastic consulting work and is just all around fabulous. We love her. Hopefully you all do as well. Thank you so much for being with us, Dom. And in our usual super cheesy fashion, it might be 2021, but we are still all about the cheese. If we could do a round of jazz hands for Dom to say thank you, that would just be wonderful. Really, we're nothing if not cheesy, Dom. My team think I'm bananas. But
have a round of jazz hands.
A round of jazz hands. It's the only way to do it. But thank you so much for your time and for your expertise.
Sure.
We're really absolutely grateful to you. Thank you so much for being here with us. For everyone that's come along, thank you so much. Please do sign up to the newsletter. We'll be sending out a summary. Poor Rosie has been madly writing it, no doubt, as we've been going. Yeah. And if there's anything that you want to find out about what we've been doing, please do let us know. This isn't a sales thing at all. If there's anything of interest, let us know. Thank you so much to Dom. We will be having you. No doubt again. Everybody stay well, look after yourselves, keep distance. The end is in sight, but we're not quite there yet. So let's do our part to keep the country safe. And Dom, to you and your colleagues in the medical profession, I think on behalf of everybody, you guys are really the unsung heroes during this period. Not unsung, but not sung enough. So really thank you for the extraordinary, dangerous and amazing work that you guys have been doing. I think hopefully we'll see a whole new generation of students wanting to be doctors and nurses and medical staff because of this, and that can only be a good thing. Thank you all so much. Look after yourselves, look after each other. We'll see you in a few weeks' time. Take care.